Welcome back, brave souls, to another spine-chilling collection of stories that will leave you questioning reality itself. Tonight, we've got 3 tales designed to keep you up at night. Now, for a challenge that's bound to stir your imagination. What's the one place you would never ever spend the night? Let me know in the comments, and the more creative and creepy, the better. And while you're contemplating that terrifying spot, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what's lurking in the shadows next. The Disappearing Room. My name is Paul Nichols, and I've lived in Boulder, Colorado for most of my life. It's a peaceful city, tucked away near the mountains, known more for hiking trails and craft beer than anything particularly strange. But something happened to me last month that I can't explain, something that still haunts me every time I close my eyes. I'm an architect by trade. I work on residential projects mostly, designing sleek, modern homes for people with more money than they know what to do with. About a month ago, I got a call from a client who wanted to remodel an old mansion on the outskirts of Boulder. The place had been abandoned for years, sitting at the end of a long, winding road surrounded by forest. It had good bones, though, and the client wanted to turn it into a vacation home. I was excited about the project. Old houses like that always have interesting quirks, hidden details, things that make them unique. The mansion, known as the Arvada House, was built in the early 1900s, and the architecture was stunning. High ceilings, intricate woodwork, the kind of craftsmanship you don't see anymore. When I first arrived at the house, everything seemed normal. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, and the interior was a little dusty, but it was exactly what I expected. I spent the better part of the day walking through the rooms, taking measurements, jotting down notes. The place was massive, with long hallways, hidden staircases, and more rooms than I could count. But something felt off. It was subtle at first, a feeling of being watched, of not being alone. Every now and then, I'd hear a faint creak from the floor above, or the whisper of wind through a crack in the wall. Old houses make noise, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. Then I found the room. It was at the end of the second-floor hallway behind a door that didn't match the rest of the house. The door was smaller, older, the wood warped and faded. I almost missed it entirely, tucked away in a shadowy corner. When I opened it, I was hit with a rush of cold air. The room beyond was dark, windowless, and empty, except for a single chair sitting in the center. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, the floor coated in dust. It looked like no one had stepped foot in there for decades. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing strangely in the small space. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp wood and mildew. As I walked further into the room, I felt a strange pressure in my chest, like the air itself was pushing against me. I stood in front of the chair, trying to make sense of the room's purpose. Why would a house like this have a hidden room? I was about to turn back when I heard something, a faint humming noise. It was low, almost imperceptible, but it seemed to vibrate through the walls. I pressed my hand against the plaster, and for a moment, it felt like the wall was pulsing under my palm. And then the door slammed shut. I jumped, my heart racing. I rushed back to the door, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I pounded on the wood, shouting, but the sound seemed to get swallowed up by the room, disappearing into the thick air. I was trapped. The humming grew louder. I turned, looking back at the chair in the center of the room. The air around it shimmered, almost like heat rising off asphalt. But it wasn't heat I was feeling. It was cold, so cold that my breath fogged up in front of me. I backed away, panic setting in, but no matter how much I pulled on the door, it wouldn't move. Suddenly, the room seemed to shift. The walls pressed in, the space around me growing smaller, tighter. The wallpaper began to peel away, revealing strange symbols etched into the wood beneath. Symbols I didn't recognize. My head throbbed as the humming filled my ears louder and louder until it was all I could hear. Then, just as quickly as it had started, it stopped, The door swung open and I stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for air. The house was silent again, the oppressive weight gone. I turned to look back at the room, but the door, it wasn't there. The wall where the door had been was solid, seamless. No sign of the small, warped door I had walked through just moments before. I ran down the stairs, my heart pounding, and left the house without looking back. That night, I tried to make sense of what had happened. I went over my notes, my sketches of the house's layout, trying to find any mention of that room. But it wasn't there. I had mapped every hallway, every room, every corner of that house, and there was no record of a room at the end of the second-floor hallway. The next day, I went back to the mansion with a crew to start the renovation. I wanted to prove to myself that what I'd seen was real, that the room existed. But when I went up to the second floor, the door wasn't there. The hallway ended at a solid wall. I asked the crew to check the walls, see if there had been any renovations, any signs of a hidden room. They found nothing. The wall was solid, just like the rest of the house. I even went through the house's original blueprints, but there was no mention of any room where I had been. It was like the room had never existed. But I know what I saw. I know I walked through that door. I know I heard the humming, felt the air press in around me. And I know that the room, whatever it was real. Now, every time I close my eyes, I see that chair in the center of the room. I hear the humming, feel the cold creeping up my spine. I haven't been back to the Arvada house since, and I don't plan to. But sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I hear it. The low, faint hum. And I wonder if the room is still there, waiting for me to find it again. Or worse, if it will find me. The Lake's Whisper. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, you get used to the rain, the gray skies, the mist that clings to the trees, the constant patter of water against the roof. It becomes part of you. But some storms are different. Some storms bring more than just rain. My name is Will Hayes, and I'm a detective with the Eugene Police Department. Most of my cases deal with the usual, a string of burglaries, the occasional homicide, but nothing out of the ordinary. That all changed last month when I was assigned to the disappearance of Kevin Grayson. It wasn't just another missing persons case, it became something more, something I still can't explain. It was early November, the kind of cold, wet season that clings to everything. Kevin, a 16-year-old high school junior, had gone missing while camping with friends at Fern Ridge Lake, just outside the city. He and a group of friends had decided to spend the weekend at one of the remote campsites by the water, enjoying the last bit of fall before winter fully set in. According to his friends, Kevin had wandered off after dark. They thought he was playing a prank or maybe just clearing his head, but he didn't come back. The next morning, they found his tent empty, his boots still sitting outside the flap. No one had heard or seen anything. When I got to the scene, the first thing I noticed was the stillness. The air was thick, heavy with fog rolling off the lake, and there was an eerie quiet that settled over the camp. It didn't feel like a place where someone had just vanished. It felt like a place where someone had been taken. We brought in search teams, dogs, even helicopters. But after 2 days, there was still no sign of Kevin. No tracks, no clues, nothing. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. But then something strange happened. On the third day, we found Kevin's jacket, draped neatly over a tree branch near the water's edge. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, nothing to suggest foul play. But something about the way the jacket was placed, deliberate, almost ritualistic, sent a chill down my spine. That's when I met Jacob Brunner. Jacob was a local fisherman, an old man who lived in a cabin on the other side of the lake. He'd been around longer than most, knew the area better than anyone. He'd been watching the search from a distance, keeping to himself, but on the fourth day he approached me as I was walking along the shore. "You won't find him," Jacob said, his voice low, rough like gravel. "Not unless the lake wants you to." I looked at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" He gestured to the water, his eyes narrowing. There are things in this lake, Detective. Things older than this town, older than all of us. People think they come here to camp, to fish, to relax. But the lake has a way of keeping things. I shook my head, brushing off his cryptic words. We're doing everything we can to find him. If you know something, you need to tell me. Jacob just stared at the water, his expression distant. Sometimes the lake whispers. If you listen, you might hear it. That night, the storm rolled in. The wind howled through the trees, the rain pouring down in sheets, making it impossible to search. The campsite was a mess, and most of the search teams had pulled back, waiting for the weather to clear. But I couldn't leave. Something about what Jacob had said, about the lake keeping things, kept gnawing at me. I stood by the shore, staring out into the dark water, the waves churning violently as the storm raged overhead. And then I heard it. At first I thought it was the wind, but as I listened closer, I realized it was something else. A voice. Faint, almost drowned out by the rain, but unmistakable. It was Kevin's voice calling for help. I grabbed my flashlight and moved closer to the water, scanning the shoreline. The voice was getting louder, more urgent, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest. But no matter where I looked, there was no sign of him. Just the empty lake and the storm. "Kevin!" I shouted into the darkness, my voice barely carrying over the wind. "Where are you?" The voice stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of the storm and the crashing waves. I stood there, drenched, waiting for something. Anything. Then, just as I was about to turn back, I saw it. A figure standing in the water, waist deep. It was Kevin. His eyes were wide, his face pale, his clothes soaked through, but he wasn't moving. He just stood there, staring at me with a blank expression. I ran toward him, splashing through the water. "Kevin, stay where you are, I'm coming." But as I got closer, something felt wrong. His eyes, there was something off about them. They weren't focused on me, they weren't focused on anything. It was like he was in a trance, standing there like a statue, oblivious to the storm around him. I reached out, grabbing his arm, trying to pull him toward the shore. His skin was ice cold and he didn't respond, didn't resist, just stood there, staring blankly ahead. "Kevin, we have to go," I shouted, but it was like he didn't even hear me. That's when I heard the whisper again, but this time it wasn't Kevin's voice, it was something else. Something deep, resonant, like the voice of the lake itself. It echoed in my head, filling my thoughts, growing louder and louder until it drowned out everything else. "Leave him. He's ours." I stumbled back, my head spinning. The whispering was relentless, swirling around me like the storm, like the very air was pressing down on me, suffocating me. I looked back at Kevin, but his face had changed. His eyes had gone dark, empty. And then, slowly, he began to walk backward, deeper into the water. "No!" I lunged forward, trying to grab him, but the lake seemed to pull him away, the waves rising up around him, swallowing him whole. Within seconds, he was gone, vanished beneath the surface. The whispering stopped. The next morning, the storm had passed. The lake was calm, almost serene, as if nothing had happened. But Kevin was still gone. The search continued for another week, but we never found him. Not a trace, not a body, just the lake, quiet and indifferent, holding its secrets beneath the surface. I went back to see Jacob after that, demanding answers. But his cabin was empty. He was gone too. No one had seen him leave. No one knew where he went. It was like he'd disappeared, just like Kevin. I still hear the whispers sometimes, late at night when the wind is just right, and the rain taps softly against my window. They're faint, but they're there, always there. The lake doesn't give up its secrets. Not easily. And some nights I wonder if it's watching me, waiting for the day it decides to take me too. The Devils of Silver Creek. I've been the sheriff of Silver Creek for about 5 years now. It's a quiet town nestled in the Rocky Mountains with just over 3,000 people. Nothing much happens here besides the occasional tourist getting lost on a hike or a petty crime involving someone having too many beers at the local bar. But last month, something changed. Something that turned our little mountain town upside down. My name is Jason Mills, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around the strange, dark events that unfolded in our town. A story that I'm not sure anyone will believe. But it's true. I lived it. It started with a death. Brandon Hawks, a local high school football player, was found dead in the forest, not far from his home. He'd gone missing after a party one Friday night, and by the time we found him, it was too late. The medical examiner said it was an accident. Brandon had fallen, hitting his head on a rock near the creek. But something about the scene didn't sit right with me. His body was lying too neatly, like it had been placed there. And his face was frozen in an expression of sheer terror, like he had seen something before he died. Something no one could explain. We filed the report as an accidental death, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. A few days later, we got another call. Eli Dunham, another high school student, was found in almost the exact same spot as Brandon. Dead, the same expression of terror on his face, his body unmarked aside from the same kind of head injury. The two deaths were eerily similar, but this time there were witnesses. According to some of the kids who had been with Eli that night, he had been arguing with two girls from the high school, Megan Bryant and Casey O'Neill. They'd been friends for years, inseparable, and known for being a little off. Not dangerous, just strange. The kind of girls who seemed to enjoy causing trouble, but nothing too serious. The kids who were at the scene said the argument had gotten heated. They said that when Megan and Casey walked away, Eli suddenly collapsed, his face twisted in fear. They swore they hadn't seen anyone touch him, but it was like something had come over him, something invisible. I decided to pay Megan and Casey a visit. They lived on opposite sides of town, but I started with Megan. She lived with her mother, a widow, in a small house near the woods. When I knocked on the door, Megan answered, her face unreadable. "Sheriff Mills," she said, her voice calm, too calm. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to ask you a few questions about Eli Dunham," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. "I heard you two had an argument the night he died." She shrugged. "Yeah, we argued, but that's all it was. Kids argue, right?" Her expression was flat, but something in her eyes made me uneasy. There was no sadness, no remorse, just emptiness. "I heard that after the argument, Eli collapsed," I said carefully. "Do you know anything about that?" Megan looked me dead in the eye and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was cold, calculating. "I didn't touch him, Sheriff. Maybe he just couldn't handle it." Her words sent a chill down my spine, and I left her house feeling more unsettled than when I'd arrived. That night, things escalated. I got a call around midnight from one of my deputies, Lisa Porter, who lived on the outskirts of town. She sounded panicked, something I wasn't used to hearing from her. "Sheriff, you need to come here now," she said, her voice shaking. "It's Megan and Casey. Something's wrong." I raced to her house, my heart pounding. When I arrived, Lisa was standing outside, pale as a ghost. "They were here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how, but they were here. I saw them in the driveway, just standing there, staring at me." "Where are they now?" I asked, scanning the dark woods surrounding her property. "They're gone. But, Sheriff, there was something else." She paused, looking around nervously before continuing. It was like the air around them was different, like it was charged with electricity. I didn't know what to make of that, but I knew one thing. Something was going on with those girls, and I needed to figure it out before anyone else got hurt. The next day, I brought Megan and Casey into the station. I didn't have anything solid to charge them with, but I figured I could at least question them and maybe shake loose some answers. They sat across from me in the small interrogation room, side by side, both with that same eerie calmness. They didn't seem nervous or scared, just bored. "You've been at the center of a lot of strange things lately," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "First Brandon, then Eli, and now you show up at Deputy Porter's house. What's going on, girls?" Megan leaned forward, her eyes locked on mine. "You wouldn't believe us if we told you." "Try me," I said. Casey spoke for the first time, her voice soft but full of confidence. "Something's happening, Sheriff. Something bigger than you. Bigger than this town." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Megan smiled again, that same cold, unsettling smile. "There's a power here in Silver Creek. It's been here for years, buried under the mountains. And now it's waking up. We didn't cause it, but we can feel it. It's been with us our whole lives." I stared at them, trying to make sense of what they were saying. "And what does that have to do with the boys who died?" "They were weak," Megan said simply. "The power, it needs strong people. People like us. They couldn't handle it." Before I could respond, the lights in the room flickered. I felt a sudden drop in temperature and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The air around the girls seemed to shimmer like the heat rising off asphalt on a summer day. "Do you feel that, Sheriff?" Casey asked, her eyes gleaming. "That's the power, and it's only going to get stronger." I released them later that day, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. There was no evidence linking them directly to the deaths, no charges I could make stick, but I knew they were involved. I just didn't know how. The next week, 2 more boys went missing. This time, their bodies weren't found. Megan and Casey disappeared soon after. No one's seen them since. I've thought about leaving Silver Creek, packing up and heading somewhere far away from these mountains. But I can't. Something's keeping me here. Some dark force that I can't explain. I don't know where those girls went or what they've become, but I do know one thing. They were right. There's a power here, something ancient and terrifying, something that's been buried for centuries, and now it's awake. If you made it through those stories without looking over your shoulder, congratulations, you're braver than most. But remember, the real terror might be just around the corner, waiting when you least expect it. Before you go, don't forget to drop your answer to the comment challenge. What's the one place you'd never dare spend the night? Who knows? Your answer might just inspire the next terrifying tale. And of course, if you enjoyed these stories, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and tap the bell icon to join us for the next dose of fear. Because here at Dark Domain, the nightmares never really end. Sleep tight, if you can.